Pennsylvania is known for its picturesque small towns and millions of acres of dense forest. For most, it's a peaceful home. But for a select few, those quiet streets became a trap. Today, we're covering the 10 most disturbing disappearances in Pennsylvania history. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, lock your doors, draw your blinds, and let's get into it. Picture this. You're the most powerful prosecutor in your county. You've spent 20 years putting murderers, drug dealers, and predators behind bars. You're 8 months away from retirement. You've got a girlfriend you live with, a daughter you adore, and a red Mini Cooper that everyone in town recognizes the second it drives by. And then one Friday morning, you tell your girlfriend you're taking the day off to enjoy the weather, and you drive off the face of the earth. No body, no wreckage, no goodbye note. Just an empty car parked outside an antique mall, a smashed laptop pulled from a river months later, and a list of internet searches that should not exist on the home computer of a man who supposedly vanished by accident. This is the case of Ray Gricar. And after more than 20 years, nobody, and I mean nobody, has any idea what actually happened to him. Let's set the scene. Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, April 15th, 2005. If you've never been to Bellefonte, let me paint a picture for you. It's the kind of place that looks like it was frozen sometime around 1910, and somebody just forgot to thaw it out. Victorian houses lining the streets, brick storefronts, a creek running through the middle of town. It's the county seat of Center County, sitting just a few miles from Penn State University, but it feels like a world away from any kind of big city chaos. And April 15th, 2005, that was a beautiful day. Unseasonably warm. We're talking 79 degrees by the afternoon, sunny skies, the kind of spring day where the heaters finally click off and people start opening their windows for the first time in months, the kind of day where you take a long lunch and you don't feel guilty about it. Now, the man at the center of this story, Ray Gricar. He wasn't just some guy, he was the guy. The district attorney of Center County, had been since 1985. 20 solid years prosecuting some of the most dangerous, complicated cases the county had ever seen, including the man who carried out a deadly sniper shooting on the Penn State campus in 1996. And here's something that becomes important later. In 1998, Ray Gricar was the prosecutor who declined to press charges against a Penn State assistant football coach named Jerry Sandusky for serious misconduct allegations. Yeah, that Jerry Sandusky. The one who would eventually be convicted of the high-profile scandal involving the assistant coach in 2011. But in 1998, Gricar looked at that case and chose not to file charges. Hold on to that. We'll come back to it. Ray was 59 years old, methodical, detail-obsessed, the kind of prosecutor who didn't make rookie mistakes. He was 8 months away from retirement and reportedly excited about it. He spoke fluent Slovenian and semi-fluent Russian, which is a weird detail to throw in here, but trust me, it matters later. This is not a man who gets lost. This is not a man who acts impulsively. This is not a man who makes a single move without thinking 3 steps ahead. So what happened to him doesn't make any sense, at all. Here's how that Friday went, according to everyone who knew him. Ray wakes up. He turns to his live-in girlfriend, Patty Fornicola, and tells her he's playing hooky. He's going to take advantage of the weather and drive east on Route 192 toward the town of Lewisburg. There's an antique mall out there called the Street of Shops. He likes browsing antiques. Nothing weird about it. He gets into his red Mini Cooper. Now, this car is important because in central Pennsylvania in 2005, a red Mini Cooper is not a subtle vehicle, and everyone who saw it remembered it. It was practically a parade float. At 11:30 a.m., he calls Patty from his county-issued cell phone. He tells her he's driving east through the rolling hills of Brush Valley on his way to Lewisburg. He sounds completely fine, relaxed, normal. Just a guy enjoying a beautiful spring drive. That phone call? That's the last time anyone he knew would ever speak to him. He arrives in Lewisburg. Witnesses at the antique mall confirm seeing him. Employees recognize him. He's casually walking around the kitschy little shops with their false fronts and their beanie babies and their scented candles. And here's a detail that's haunted investigators for 2 decades. He wasn't alone. Multiple witnesses said Ray was walking through the antique mall with an unidentified dark-haired woman. Not arguing, not in distress, just walking, like a couple browsing on a Friday afternoon. That woman has never come forward, not once, in 20 years, despite massive media coverage, despite a $5,000 reward. She just doesn't exist in any record anywhere. She walked into his story and walked right back out. Now, this is where it gets strange. Ray doesn't come home that night. Patty waits up. She calls. Nothing. The next morning, April 16th, she calls 911 in a panic. Later that day, a state trooper finds Ray's red Mini Cooper. It's parked in the lot of the antique mall in Lewisburg, right near the Susquehanna River. The car is locked. Inside, sitting there like he just stepped out for a minute, is his county-issued cell phone. But his wallet, gone. His keys, gone. His county-issued laptop, gone. And the inside of the car smells like cigarette smoke, fresh cigarette smoke. Ray Gricar hated cigarettes, detested them, never smoked a day in his life and didn't let other people smoke around him. So who was in his car? But here's where the story takes the turn that nobody saw coming. Months go by. The search for Ray drags on. Bloodhounds, helicopters, divers in the Susquehanna River, nothing. Not a footprint, not a thread of clothing, nothing. Then, in late July 2005, fishermen working under the PA-45 bridge near Lewisburg pull something out of the muddy water. It's a laptop. It's Ray Gricar's county-issued laptop. Investigators are ecstatic. Finally, a break. Finally, evidence. Except when they open the casing, the hard drive is gone. Not damaged, not corrupted, physically removed. Somebody had taken the time to unscrew the laptop, pry out the hard drive, and then chuck the empty shell into the river. Months later, and I mean months, someone walking along the riverbank, about 100 yards downstream from where the laptop was found, spots something in the dirt. It's the missing hard drive, and it has been destroyed. We're not talking about a hard drive that got wet. We're talking about a hard drive that was so catastrophically damaged that the FBI couldn't recover anything from it. The U.S. Secret Service couldn't recover anything from it. Specialized private data recovery firms with multi-million-dollar equipment couldn't recover a single byte. Whoever destroyed that hard drive knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a panic toss into a river. This was a deliberate, technical, thorough demolition. And then comes the detail that turns this whole case upside down. When investigators searched Ray Gricar's home computer, they found searches in the browser history. Specific searches, things like how to fry a hard drive, how to wreck a hard drive, water damage to a notebook computer. Let that sit with you for a second. Okay, let's look at the theories, because everybody has one, and every single one of them has a hole in it big enough to drive a red Mini Cooper through. First theory is he chose to unalived himself. The cops loved this one early on, and on the surface, it makes sense. Ray's older brother tragically took his own life in 1996, and Ray's car was found right next to the Susquehanna River, near 2 bridges. Easy story. Tragic but easy. But here's the thing. Where's the body? The Susquehanna is a busy river, but it's not the ocean. It's been searched over and over. Divers, sonar, helicopters, nothing. And Ray was 59 years old and a poor swimmer. If he jumped in, he wouldn't have gone far. And more importantly, why would a man planning to take his own life spend the previous days Googling how to destroy a hard drive? Why drive an hour and a half to an antique mall first? Why bring a laptop just to dismantle it on a riverbank? Taking his own life is rarely that elaborate. It's tragic, it's emotional, it's impulsive. It is almost never a 5-act play. Another theory is he walked away. This is the fan favorite, the romantic theory. Ray Gricar got tired of the law, of the politics, of the pressure, and he engineered his own escape. The Slovenian fluency comes back here. Maybe he caught a flight and disappeared into Eastern Europe. Maybe he's sipping coffee in Ljubljana right now. But hold on, let's look at that again. If you're walking away to start a new life, why would you take the time to physically unscrew a hard drive from a laptop? Why would you destroy it so thoroughly that the FBI can't read it? Just take it with you, or wipe it, or burn it. And here's the bigger problem. Why on earth would you leave the Google searches how to fry a hard drive on your home computer? The one you knew investigators would tear apart the second you went missing. That's not a man covering his tracks. That's a man leaving breadcrumbs. Or worse, that's somebody else planting breadcrumbs. A man doesn't walk into the void penniless, and a man who's smart enough to vanish into Eastern Europe is smart enough to clear his browser history. Third theory is foul play. This is the dark one. Ray was a DA. He put away dangerous people. There were rumors of a heroin ring he was investigating, rumors of Hell's Angels connections, and of course, the elephant in the room, the 1998 Sandusky case he didn't prosecute. Did he know something? Did he find something? Did somebody decide he was about to talk? But even this theory has problems. If a criminal organization wanted Ray Gricar dead, why this? Why the antique mall? Why the locked car with the cell phone neatly sitting inside? Why dismantle a laptop and scatter the pieces along 100 yards of riverbank? Hits don't look like this. Hits look like a body in a ditch or a body that's never found at all. They don't look like an art installation. And then there's that cigarette ash, that fresh cigarette smell in a car owned by a man who hated smoking. So who was in that car with him? Was it the dark-haired woman from the antique mall? Was it someone he trusted enough to let into his vehicle? Someone he knew? Because here's what nobody talks about. Ray Gricar was a careful man. He prosecuted murderers. He understood threats. He doesn't get into a car with a stranger. He doesn't drive to a quiet riverside town with somebody he doesn't know. Whoever was with Ray Gricar that day, Ray Gricar trusted them. And that might be the scariest part of this whole story. For 6 years, the case stayed officially open. The FBI got involved. National media descended on Bellefonte. There were tips, sightings, reports of Ray Gricar in a Wilkes-Barre bar watching a baseball game, whispers from Europe, anonymous letters. None of it ever led anywhere. On July 25, 2011, after exhausting every lead, every theory, every search, Center County authorities did the only thing they had left to do. They officially declared Ray Gricar legally dead. But declaring someone dead and finding them are two very different things. 20 years later, his daughter still doesn't have an answer. His former colleagues still don't have an answer. The Pennsylvania State Police still don't have an answer. And every theory, taking his own life, walk away, hit job, every single one of them collapses under the weight of one simple question. Why the hard drive? That's the thing I keep coming back to. That tiny piece of metal pulled from the riverbank, smashed beyond recognition, hiding whatever secret Ray Gricar, or someone else, needed buried forever. He was a district attorney with 20 years of experience. He was 8 months from retirement. He had a girlfriend, a daughter, a future. He woke up on a beautiful spring Friday, told his girlfriend he was going for a drive, climbed into his red Mini Cooper, and pulled off the most baffling vanishing act in Pennsylvania history. And somewhere out there, somebody knows exactly what happened to him. They just aren't talking. Imagine this: a hot, sticky July night in small-town Pennsylvania, a cramped apartment building with paper-thin walls. Police have been to the building twice in the last few hours for noise complaints. The neighbors are seething. The cops have just left for the second time, and everything has finally gone quiet. A 21-year-old woman crawls into bed. Her friend crashes nearby. Her dog is curled up somewhere in the apartment. The door is locked. The windows are closed. It's around 3:30 in the morning. A few hours later, the sun comes up. The friend wakes up. And Courtney Stufer is gone. Her keys are still there. Her phone is still there. Her purse, her shoes, her dog, all still inside the locked apartment. But the woman herself has just evaporated out of a building with neighbors stacked on every side, in a town small enough that everybody knows everybody, without making a sound. How does that happen? How does that happen anywhere, in any century, but especially in 2012? Let me tell you what we actually know. It's late July 2012. The location is 810 West Main Street in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. If you've never been to Palmyra, picture a small Lebanon County town. Quiet streets, a few bars, a handful of pizza shops, the kind of place where the police know the troublemakers by name, and the troublemakers know the police by name right back. The building itself is a typical small-town apartment complex, thin walls, shared stairwells, the kind of place where you hear your neighbor's TV through the floor and your upstairs neighbor's footsteps across the ceiling. Privacy is essentially a myth in a building like this. If somebody screams, the whole block hears it. If somebody bangs around, the people downstairs are pounding the broom handle against the ceiling within 90 seconds. And on this particular night, the building is a powder keg. The air is hot and humid. Tempers are short. Several different conflicts are simmering between several different people. By the time the early morning hours arrive, the whole place is wound up tight, hyper-aware, listening for the next thing to happen. That's the atmosphere. Hold on to it, because it's going to matter when we start asking how somebody could possibly disappear from inside it. Courtney Sierra Stufer, 21 years old, 5'8", blonde hair, a one love tattoo on her right arm, 3 little stars on her foot, and a tattoo of a pistol shooting flowers on her left side. She worked at a salon and as a pet groomer. She had a vibe that was part hippie, part free spirit, part girl who absolutely will not let you push her around. I want you to understand who Courtney was, because it matters. She was fiery. She was loyal. She was feisty in the way that small-town girls who grew up taking care of themselves are feisty. She was not going to back down from an argument with a neighbor. She was not going to let somebody disrespect her without saying something back. That personality, that absolute unwillingness to shrink, ends up being a key part of why this case is so impossible to make sense of. But here's the most important detail about Courtney. She had a dog, a rescue. And by every account from her family and her friends, that dog was the absolute center of her world. Courtney was a pet groomer. She built her life around animals. She took her dog everywhere. She talked about her dog the way some people talk about their children. The idea that Courtney would voluntarily walk out of an apartment and leave her dog behind to fend for itself, that isn't just unlikely. According to everyone who knew her, that was behaviorally impossible. Remember that, because we're going to come back to it. It's July 28, 2012. Around 9 o'clock at night, things get weird at 810 West Main Street. Palmyra Borough Police, along with Lebanon County adult probation officers, raid Courtney's apartment. Why? Because somebody, probably the neighbors, called in a complaint about underage drinking. Courtney's boyfriend, Brad Herr, who is on house arrest, gets hauled away on a probation violation. Courtney, who is the only person in the apartment of legal drinking age, is left alone, agitated, embarrassed, and angry. So she does what a lot of 21-year-olds do when their night gets blown up. She calls some friends. Cody Pruitt and Milton Rodriguez pick her up, and they head out to bars in Hummelstown and then over to Harrisburg. By 1:50 a.m., Courtney is at a place called the Hardware Bar, where she gets into a verbal fight with another woman and gets kicked out by security. At 2 a.m., her friends drive her back to Palmyra. They drop Rodriguez off at his house. Pruitt continues on with Courtney to her apartment, intending to crash there for the night. And this is where the next layer of chaos begins. Between 3 and 3:30 a.m., Palmyra police get called to Courtney's apartment again, twice within 30 minutes. The first time, officers actually have to physically intervene to break up a screaming match between Courtney and her downstairs neighbors. They calm everybody down, they leave. Then, at exactly 3:30 a.m., officers come back, another noise complaint. They knock on the door. This time, nobody answers. The cops eventually leave. The building goes quiet. Pruitt later tells investigators he and Courtney were in the apartment and he just went to sleep. Then, at 7:30 in the morning, Pruitt wakes up. The apartment is empty. Courtney is gone. He leaves the apartment, goes to a nearby store, and is captured on surveillance video texting Courtney, asking where she went. But here's the thing. She wasn't anywhere. She still isn't anywhere. When investigators got into that apartment, here's what they found. Her purse, sitting there, her cell phone right there, her car keys on the counter, her car parked outside untouched, her shoes, her dog. The front door, locked from the inside, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no knocked over furniture, No torn clothing, no forced entry on the door or the windows. A 21-year-old woman just dissolved out of a locked apartment, leaving every single piece of her life sitting exactly where she'd put it down a few hours earlier. Now, let's start tearing apart the theories, because every single one of them has a fatal flaw. First theory is, she just walked off to cool down. This is the first thing people thought. The neighbors had been screaming at her. The cops had been there twice. Maybe she just needed air. Maybe she walked down the block to clear her head. Hold on a second. Let's look at that. She was barefoot. Her shoes were inside. It's the middle of the night. We're talking about a residential neighborhood at 3:30 a.m. You don't walk anywhere without shoes. You don't walk anywhere without your phone in 2012, when phones are how 21-year-olds breathe. You don't leave your purse, your wallet, your keys, and most damningly, you don't leave your dog. Courtney Stufer, the pet groomer, the rescue mom, the woman whose entire personality was wrapped around that animal, does not voluntarily walk out the door and abandon her dog without food, without water, without anyone to look after it. It's not in her behavioral profile. It's not in her DNA. If she walked off, she came back. And she didn't come back. Another theory is, an angry neighbor took revenge. This is the most popular theory in Palmyra to this day. The downstairs neighbors had been at war with Courtney all night. They called the cops. She screamed at them. Things were genuinely hostile. So maybe after the second police visit, somebody went upstairs and finished what they started. But here's the thing. How? Think about what that would actually require. You would have to enter a locked apartment without breaking in. You would have to silently overpower a feisty, fully aware 21-year-old woman who, just minutes earlier, was screaming loud enough to bring the cops back. You would have to do it without waking up the friend sleeping right there in the same apartment. You would have to do it without making the dog bark. In a building with walls so thin the neighbors could hear an argument, you would have to pull off a kidnapping in total silence. And then, somehow, you'd have to get her body, or her unconscious self, down a shared stairwell, out of a building where every other tenant was already wide awake and listening for trouble, without a single witness seeing or hearing a thing. That's not a revenge kidnapping. That's a magic trick. Third theory suggests that a friend is inside the apartment. There was, of course, somebody else in there. Cody Pruitt. He was the last person known to have seen Courtney alive. Police rigorously investigated him. They executed search warrants on Rodriguez's car and his father's home. Polygraphs were administered. Detectives looked hard. But here's the problem with this theory too. Pruitt claims he slept through everything, including the police pounding on the front door at 3:30 a.m. Now, you can absolutely raise an eyebrow at that. After a night of fights and screaming and adrenaline and police visits, sleeping through a cop's knock is, let's just say, behaviorally suspicious. But even if he did do something, the math gets impossible fast. He had a window of, at most, 4 hours, on foot, in a town where the police had literally just been on his doorstep. He had to incapacitate her, deal with her, and then dispose of her so completely that she would never, ever be found. No body in the apartment, no body in the dumpster, no body anywhere within walking distance, even after years of searches. That's a forensic miracle. And miracles don't happen at 4 a.m. in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. The district attorney's office eventually cleared both men as suspects, not because they were definitely innocent, but because there was no evidence anywhere to charge them. So what happened to Courtney Stufer? The honest answer is, nobody knows. And I mean nobody. Not the police, not the DA, not the FBI, not the private investigators her family hired, not the family themselves, who have spent over a decade holding floats down the Swatara Creek every year, hanging signs, raising reward money, refusing to let her be forgotten. A local pizza shop sold peace pizzas and raised over $30,000 in reward money. The community has done everything a community can do. And still, nothing. Courtney Stufer didn't leave a trail. She didn't leave a clue. She didn't leave a body. She didn't leave a witness. She left a locked apartment, a sleeping friend, a faithful dog, and a purse on the counter. That's it. That's all we have. And here's the haunting image. It's 3:30 a.m. The cops have just walked back down the stairs after their second visit. The building is finally quiet for the first time all night. The hallway light is humming. Somewhere in the apartment, a dog is settling down on the floor. A friend is starting to fall asleep on the couch. And in the bedroom, a 21-year-old woman is alive. She is breathing. She's right there. A few hours later, she's gone. And everything she owns, including the dog she would have died to protect, is still sitting exactly where she left it. A locked room mystery. In a building full of people, in the middle of a small Pennsylvania town, in 2012. Courtney Stufer is still out there somewhere, and whoever knows what happened in that apartment between 3:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. has, for over a decade now, kept their mouths shut. It's 4:10 p.m. on a cold February afternoon in rural Pennsylvania. A school bus rumbles up to a quiet stop on a dirt road. The doors open. 4 kids step off, breathing little clouds of steam in the freezing air. 3 of them get into a waiting car with a neighbor. The 4th, an 8-year-old girl in a gray coat and a blue denim skirt and a pair of bright Cabbage Patch Kids earmuffs, turns and starts walking up her own driveway. Her house is right there, 100 yards up a steep dirt slope. Her stepfather's inside, listening for the sound of the bus pulling away. Her mother's just minutes from coming down to meet her. The bus pulls forward. The diesel rumble fades. The dust settles back onto the dirt road. And in those next 10 or 15 seconds, before anyone can even step outside to greet her, Cherry Mahan is gone. No scream, no struggle, no footprints up the driveway, just an empty 100 yards of dirt and melting snow. This is one of the most haunting child disappearances in American history. And it happened in the time it takes you to read this paragraph. Let me walk you through it. It's February 22nd, 1985. The location is Winfield Township in Butler County, Pennsylvania. If you've never been to this part of the state, picture rolling hills, big stretches of farmland, dirt roads cutting between sparse clusters of houses. This is rural Pennsylvania at its quietest. We're talking about a community where families are stretched out across miles of countryside, where neighbors might be a quarter-mile apart, where the school bus is the social heartbeat of the entire road. The specific street is called Corn Planter Road, an unpaved stretch of dirt at the base of a steep 150-yard uphill driveway leading to the Mahan family home. And on this particular afternoon, the weather has done something interesting. The brutal Pennsylvania winter is finally starting to break. There's still snow on the ground, but it's been warming up. The snow is melting. The dirt road is muddy in patches. The air is cold, but not punishing. It's the kind of late February afternoon where you can feel spring lurking just around the corner. It's a Friday. School is out. The weekend is here. For an 8-year-old, this is one of those golden afternoons where everything feels right, especially because that very night, Cherry has plans. Her friend Jennifer is having a 10th birthday party. Cherry has been counting down to it all day. That detail matters. Hold on to it, because it dismantles one of the theories before we even get to it. Cherry Ann Mahan, 8 years old, a 3rd grader at Winfield Elementary, petite, 4'2", 68 pounds, brown hair, hazel eyes, pierced ears, a small distinctive scar on her left arm from an old dog bite. I want you to picture her clearly, because the way she was dressed that day is heartbreakingly specific. A gray coat, a blue denim skirt, a white leotard underneath, blue leg warmers, beige boots, and on her head, the detail that everyone who knew her remembers, a pair of brightly colored Cabbage Patch Kids earmuffs. If you grew up in the 80s, you know exactly what those look like. Cartoonish, cheerful, the kind of thing you'd notice from across a parking lot. Cherry was, by every account, a regimented, talkative, loving kid. Her mother, Janice McKinney, described her as deeply communicative. She wasn't a quiet child. She wasn't a wanderer. She wasn't the type to slip off into the woods and explore. She was the kind of kid who had plans, who told you about her day, who counted down to birthday parties. That morning, Janice walked Cherry all the way down the long, steep driveway to the bus stop. They chatted. Cherry issued playful little orders about what she wanted to do after school. She talked excitedly about Jennifer's birthday party. They said, "I love you." Cherry boarded the bus. That was the last time her mother ever saw her. It's 4:10 p.m. The school bus pulls up to its designated stop on Corn Planter Road, right at the bottom of the Mahan driveway. 4 kids step off the bus, Cherry and 3 of her classmates. Now, this is the part where the timeline gets very, very tight. A neighbor, a mom named Debbie Burke, has been driving behind the bus, ready to pick up the 3 other children. The moment the kids step off, she pulls up. The 3 kids climb into her car. They drive off. Cherry, meanwhile, turns to walk up her own driveway. It's 100 yards of steep snow and mud-covered dirt slope. From the bus stop, you can see her house up at the top of the hill. The bus pulls forward and rumbles off down the road. At the same time, inside the house, Cherry's stepfather, Leroy, hears the bus stop. He knows what that sound means. Cherry is home. He's listening for the front door. But then a few minutes pass, and a few more, and the front door doesn't open. Leroy and Janice eventually go outside. They walk down the driveway, expecting to see Cherry maybe playing in the snow, maybe stop to look at something. The driveway is empty. Now, here's the detail that will keep you up at night. The kids who were still on the bus looking out the back windows as it pulled away later told investigators what they saw. They saw Cherry standing at the bottom of her driveway. They saw a van parked nearby, and then the bus turned a corner. That van was the last thing she ever stood next to. When the parents finally walked the full length of that driveway, they found absolutely nothing. No backpack, no earmuffs, no little mittens dropped in the snow, no footprints leading up toward the house. Think about that. There was melting snow on the ground, the kind of conditions that take impressions perfectly. A child walking up that driveway leaves a trail of small boot prints, easy to spot, easy to follow. There were no small footprints leading up the driveway. There were, however, fresh tire impressions in the soft soil about 50 yards from the house. A vehicle had backed into the driveway and pulled out again, quickly. When tracking dogs were eventually brought in, the dogs picked up Cherry's scent. Briefly, they followed it a few feet away from where she'd stepped off the bus, and then the scent just stopped. A scent doesn't stop in the middle of a dirt road. A scent stops because the person stopped walking. They got into a vehicle. Somewhere in those 10 or 15 seconds between the bus pulling away and the dust settling, Cherry Mon was lifted off her feet and put into a vehicle. She didn't walk anywhere. She didn't run anywhere. She was, in the most literal sense, plucked out of her own front yard. Let's pull apart the theories. First theory is, she just wandered off into the woods. This was an early thought, mostly because it's what investigators always have to rule out first. Maybe she got distracted. Maybe she walked off to play. Hold on a second, let's look at that. It's late February. Cherry is wearing a denim skirt over a leotard, bare-legged underneath leg warmers. The temperature is hovering near freezing. She is 100 yards from her warm house. She has a 10th birthday party to get ready for that very night. 8-year-olds with party plans do not voluntarily wander into the woods in February in a skirt. And again, the dogs hit a dead end. The scent stopped. Not at a tree, not at a creek, not at the edge of the woods. It stopped at the road. A child who voluntarily wanders off leaves a trail. Cherry didn't leave one. Theory 2 is about the blue van. Now, this is the detail that makes this case so famous and so impossibly strange. The kids on the bus, the ones looking out the back window as it pulled away, gave investigators a very specific description of a vehicle parked near Cherry's bus stop. They described a 1970s-era Dodge conversion van, possibly a 1976 model, bluish green. And on the side of this van, painted as a custom mural, was a striking image of a skier traversing a snow-covered mountain with a sun. The kind of detailed full-side panel artwork that you absolutely could not miss. Hold on. Let's think about that for a second. If you were a kidnapper and you wanted to abduct a child without being identified, what is the last vehicle on earth you would choose? You would not choose a van that looks like a billboard. You would not choose a vehicle with a custom mural so specific that anybody who saw it driving down the road would remember it for the rest of their life. And yet, that's the vehicle that was at the scene. Now, here is the impossible part. After Cherry disappeared, that van vanished too. Police, the FBI, and tens of thousands of citizens responding to the largest missing child mailer campaign in American history all looking for this distinctive van, and nobody could find it. Witnesses later told investigators they had seen a van matching the description heading toward a town called Mount Pleasant after the disappearance, and, more chillingly, that the van was hastily repainted black just 1 or 2 weeks later. If true, that detail tells you everything. The mural was not a careless mistake. The mural was a tool, a bright, friendly, child-attracting decoration on the side of a vehicle that was specifically designed to lower a kid's defenses. And once it had served its purpose, the killer painted over it and made the van disappear forever. Main question is, how is it even possible? This is the part that genuinely keeps me up at night. Grabbing an 8-year-old in broad daylight on a residential road in a tight-knit rural community takes guts. It also usually takes time, and it usually causes a commotion. 8-year-olds scream. 8-year-olds fight back. 8-year-olds get the attention of every adult within 200 yards. But Cherry didn't scream. The 3 kids who had just been dropped off with her just a few feet away didn't hear a struggle. The neighbor mom, Debbie Burke, who was right there picking up the other kids, didn't see a thing. The window was, at most, 15 seconds. That is not random. That is not opportunistic. That is somebody who had timed the school bus route, who knew exactly when the other kids would be picked up, who knew exactly when Janice and Leroy would be unable to see the bottom of the driveway, who knew to the second when Cherry would be alone and exposed. Some investigators have theorized that Cherry may have recognized whoever was driving that van, that she might have walked over willingly. Her mother has long suggested it could have been somebody connected, even loosely, to Cherry's biological father. That theory would explain the silence. It would explain why she didn't scream. It would explain why she didn't run. But it would also be the worst kind of betrayal. Cherry Maughan's disappearance changed the way America looks for missing children forever. She became the very first missing child ever featured on those "Have You Seen Me?" direct mail postcards that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children began sending to homes across the country. Her face in millions of mailboxes, her photo in every grocery store, every post office, every laundromat. Tens of thousands of tips poured in over the years. Not one of them led to her. The Pennsylvania State Police are still actively working the case, even 40 years later. As recently as 2024, they conducted physical excavations in nearby South Buffalo Township, following up on new tips. Every dig, every search, every renewed lead has come up empty. The van was never found. The mural artist was never identified. The driver was never caught. Cherry Maughan, the talkative little girl in the Cabbage Patch earmuffs, has never come home. Here's the haunting image that I want you to leave with. It's 4:10 p.m. The school bus is pulling away from the bottom of a long dirt driveway. The diesel rumble is fading. A small girl in a gray coat and bright earmuffs is standing in the dust, getting ready to walk up the hill to her house. Her mom is inside, maybe finishing up dishes. Her stepfather's listening for the front door. Tonight, she has a birthday party to go to. Her party clothes are probably already laid out on her bed. The bus turns the corner. The dust starts to settle. 15 seconds pass, and by the time her mother walks down the driveway to meet her, the only thing left on Corn Planter Road is a fresh set of tire tracks where a brightly painted van used to be. Cherry Maughan was 8 years old. She is still 8 years old in every photograph of her, and she is still, after 40 years, somewhere just outside the frame. Imagine you're 9 years old. You wake up in the middle of the night because you hear a strange noise downstairs. You climb out of bed, rub your eyes, and walk into the hallway. You look down the staircase, and there's a man you've never seen before, standing in your house with your mother slung over his shoulder. She isn't moving. She isn't making a sound. She's just hanging there, limp. Now imagine he sees you. He looks right at you. And instead of running, instead of panicking, instead of doing anything that a normal kidnapper would do, he calmly walks over, pats you on the head, and tells you in a soft voice, "Go back to sleep, little one. Your mommy has been sick." And then he carries her out the front door, locks it behind him, and vanishes into the night. That actually happened in 1949 in Philadelphia to a real woman named Dorothy Forstein. And in the 70-plus years since that night, Nobody has ever figured out who that man was, where he took her, or why on earth he stopped to comfort the only witness to his crime. This is one of the strangest home invasions in American criminal history. And the more you look at it, the less sense it makes. Let's set the scene. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, October 18th, 1949. You have to understand what America felt like in 1949 to really get how shocking this case was. The war was over. The boys were home. The economy was booming. And in the affluent neighborhoods of Philadelphia, the kind of neighborhood with manicured front lawns and tree-lined streets and milk delivered right to your doorstep, people genuinely felt safe. We're talking about a level of security that's almost hard to imagine today. People left their doors unlocked. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on. Neighbors knew each other by name. It was the absolute peak of the post-war suburban dream, a bubble of confidence and safety that, looking back, seems almost too good to be true. And right in the middle of that bubble lived the Forstein family. Dorothy Forstein was 40 years old. She was a wife and a devoted mother of 3. Her husband, Jules Forstein, was a Philadelphia magistrate, a city judge with a real name in legal circles, the kind of guy who walked into a room and people stood a little straighter. He was respected. He was connected. He had the kind of social standing that came with a beautiful home, a beautiful family, and the assumption that nothing bad could ever touch them. Dorothy was, by all accounts, a wonderful mother. She poured everything she had into her 3 children. Her stepdaughter Marcy was 9 years old. There were 2 younger kids in the house too. The home was warm. The home was loved. But here's the thing. Dorothy had a secret in her past that's absolutely critical to this story. 5 years earlier, in 1944, she had been the victim of a brutal physical assault inside that very same house. Some unknown man had broken in and beaten her so violently that she barely survived. Police never caught him, never identified him, never came up with a single solid lead. The case just faded. So underneath that perfect post-war veneer, Dorothy was a woman who had already been targeted once. She knew on some deep level that the bubble of safety wasn't real. And yet, on October 18th, 1949, she was home with her kids in a quiet, prestigious Philadelphia neighborhood, doing what mothers do. She had no idea this was the night. Here's how it played out, as best as anyone has ever been able to reconstruct it. That evening, Magistrate Jules Forstein had business out of the house, so Dorothy was home alone with her 2 youngest children. The older kids were tucked in. Dorothy was downstairs. The house was quiet. Just another peaceful weeknight in 1949 Philadelphia. Now, this is where it gets strange. Sometime late that night, 9-year-old Marcy was asleep in her bedroom upstairs, and something woke her up. Some noise, some sound that didn't belong. Adults often forget how alert kids actually are at night. They notice things that grown-ups sleep right through. And whatever Marcy heard, it pulled her out of bed. She walked into the upstairs hallway. The house was dim, quiet, but not the right kind of quiet. She made her way to the top of the staircase, and she looked down. What Marcy saw, that 9-year-old little girl saw with her own 2 eyes, would haunt investigators for decades. Lying on the floor of her parents' bedroom was Dorothy. Face down, completely motionless, and standing over her was a man, a stranger. Marcy had never seen him before in her life. The man bent down, picked Dorothy up, and slung her over his shoulder like a sack of laundry. Like he'd done it 100 times. There was no struggle, no screaming, no frantic movement. Dorothy was just out, unconscious, and this man was carrying her like cargo. He started walking toward the staircase, and then he saw Marcy. Now, stop and put yourself in this guy's shoes for a second. You've just broken into the home of a city magistrate. You've somehow incapacitated his wife without making enough noise to wake anyone up. You're carrying her unconscious body out of the house, and as you start to leave, you look up, and there's a 9-year-old child standing at the top of the stairs, staring directly at you. The only living witness to whatever crime you are right now in the middle of committing. What does a normal criminal do? He panics. He drops the body and runs. He attacks the child. He pulls a weapon. He does something violent or chaotic. This man did none of that. According to Marcy's testimony, Testimony that child psychiatrists later examined and concluded was completely truthful, free of any embellishment or fantasy. This man calmly walked over to her, reached out his hand, and gently patted her on the head. And then he said the line that has chilled every single person who's ever read this case file. "Go back to sleep, little one. Your mommy's been sick." He soothed her. He soothed the eyewitness to his own kidnapping. Then, with Dorothy still slung over his shoulder, he walked down the staircase, carried her out the front door, and pulled it closed behind him. He locked it from the outside as he left. About 15 minutes later, Jules Forstein came home. He found his children crying in the hallway, and his wife was gone. She was never seen again? Okay, let's tear this thing apart, because every theory anyone has ever floated about Dorothy Forstein collapses the moment you actually think about it. First theory is about a random burglary or stranger kidnapping. On the surface, sure, big house, prominent family, somebody breaks in. But here's the thing. Nothing was stolen. Not a single piece of jewelry, not a wallet, not silverware, nothing. If this was a random burglar, why did he leave behind a house full of valuables to walk out with an unconscious woman over his shoulder? Burglars want money. They want stuff they can fence. They don't kidnap. And how did this guy even get in? Police found absolutely no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no jimmied locks, nothing. Either Dorothy let him in willingly, which means she knew him, or he had a key. And then there's the bigger problem. How does a single man knock a grown woman completely unconscious without leaving signs of a struggle? No overturned furniture, no screams loud enough to wake the kids in time, no blood, no defensive wounds anyone could later identify. He didn't just attack her, he neutralized her surgically and silently in seconds. Burglars don't do that. Random opportunists don't do that. Professionals do that. Second theory is the mysterious phone call. Here's a detail that gets buried in the case file but should be screaming at us. Investigators determined that a phone call had been placed from inside the Forstein home right around the time of the abduction. Think about that. A phone call. In the middle of a kidnapping, who made that call? Was it Dorothy in those last conscious seconds before she was attacked, frantically trying to dial for help? Or was it the intruder himself, calmly using the family phone to call an accomplice waiting outside? She's down. I'm bringing her out. Pull up to the front. Both options are terrifying. One means Dorothy knew exactly what was about to happen to her and didn't have time to finish the call. The other means we're not dealing with one guy. We're dealing with a team, a coordinated operation. People who scoped this house and waited for the right night, and neither option matches the profile of a random crime. Another theory is revenge against the husband. Now, this is the theory the police really chased. Jules Forstein was a magistrate. He sent people to jail. He made enemies the way most of us make grocery lists. And in the late 40s, organized crime in Philadelphia was no joke. So the obvious thought was that somebody Jules had put away decided to hit him where it hurt the most. Take his wife. But here's where the logic falls apart again. If you're a mob enforcer or a hired thug looking to send a message, you don't pull off a Houdini-level home invasion. You don't carefully and silently incapacitate a woman so quietly that her kids sleep through it. You don't take the time to lock the door behind you on the way out. You especially don't stop mid-kidnapping to gently pat the head of the only witness in the entire house and tell her in a soft voice that mommy is sick. A revenge hit is loud, it's violent, it's meant to scare. This was the opposite. This was meticulous, quiet, almost tender. There was no message left behind, no threats, no phone calls to Jules afterward saying, "We have your wife." Just silence. That's not revenge. That's something else entirely. Something far more disturbing. Fourth theory is about the 1944 attack. And here's the one that keeps me up at night. 5 years before she vanished, somebody broke into Dorothy's house and tried to kill her. They never caught him, never identified him. The case went cold and stayed cold. So is it the same guy? If it is, the question becomes, why? Why beat her half to death in 1944, then disappear for half a decade, then come back in 1949 not to attack her, but to take her? What changed? What was the connection between Dorothy and this person? Because two violent home intrusions targeting the same specific woman, separated by 5 years, in an era of ultra-low urban crime rates, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. That's a fixation. Was this somebody who had been watching her for years? Somebody from her past she couldn't escape? Somebody with a personal obsession that finally boiled over into the night of October 18th? We don't know. Nobody knows. The same investigators who couldn't solve the 1944 attack also couldn't solve the 1949 disappearance. 2 crimes, same victim, same house, 0 answers. The Philadelphia police poured everything they had into finding Dorothy Forstein. Jules Forstein was a magistrate. He had connections. He pulled every string he could pull. The case got national media attention. Tip lines lit up. Detectives chased leads for years, and nothing. No body, no ransom note. No credible sighting. No suspect they could ever pin it on. No accomplice who flipped. No deathbed confession decades later. Just absolute, total silence. Dorothy Forstein was carried out of her own home, in her own bedroom, in her own neighborhood, in front of her own child, by a man who treated the whole thing like he was running an errand. And then she was gone. That's what makes this case so deeply, deeply unsettling. It's not the violence, it's the lack of violence, it's the calm, it's the padded head and the soft voice and the locked front door. It's the idea that somebody in 1949 was so confident, so practiced, so completely unbothered by getting caught that he stopped in the middle of a kidnapping to comfort a child. We always tell ourselves that home is the safest place, that if we lock the doors and pull the curtains and tuck the kids in, we've done our job. The Forstein family did all of that. They lived in the safest neighborhood, in the safest decade, with one of the most powerful men in the city. None of it mattered. Somewhere on a quiet Philadelphia street, a strange man walked into a perfect house and walked out with the mother of 3 children draped over his shoulder. He told a little girl that her mommy was sick. He locked the door behind him, and 70+ years later, that little girl is gone. That magistrate is gone. That house is gone. And Dorothy Forstein is still missing. She just got carried into the dark, and the dark never gave her back. It's 4 a.m. on November 1st, 2001. A 21-year-old college senior steps out of her friend's car in front of her apartment building in State College, Pennsylvania. She's wearing a Playboy bunny costume, ears, tail, the whole thing. She's tired but happy. It's been a long, fun Halloween night. Her friend watches her walk toward the front door, waves goodbye, and drives off. A few days later, friends notice she's missed work. They go to her apartment. Inside, they find her backpack, her cell phone, her false eyelashes neatly placed on the bathroom counter. There's no blood, no overturned furniture, no torn fabric. The door's locked. But Cindy Song is gone. And what makes this case different from 1,000 other college disappearances is the one detail nobody can explain. Whatever happened to her happened in the few minutes between her friend driving away and her finishing her nightly routine. A window so small it shouldn't even exist. Let me walk you through it. It's Halloween night 2001 in State College, Pennsylvania. If you've never been there, let me set the scene. State College is the home of Penn State University, one of the largest universities in America. We're talking a campus of around 40,000 students, plopped down in the middle of central Pennsylvania, surrounded by farmland and rolling hills. During the school year, the entire town basically becomes one big Penn State neighborhood. Bars, apartments, pizza shops, everything caters to college kids. And on Halloween, in a Big Ten college town in 2001, the place becomes absolute chaos. Imagine West College Avenue absolutely packed with thousands of students in costume. Witches, vampires, ghosts, every Disney character you can think of. Beer flowing out of every doorway, music pouring out of every bar, bodies everywhere. Now think about what that environment does to your ability to recognize a face. Everyone is in disguise. Everyone is wearing makeup, masks, wigs. Identities are literally hidden. Erratic behavior is normalized because, hey, It's Halloween. That person stumbling down the sidewalk in a Power Rangers outfit is just having a good time. Witnesses are unreliable because, frankly, witnesses are drunk. For the average college kid, Halloween night feels like a giant communal party. But for a predator, Halloween night is something else entirely. It's the perfect hunting ground. You can stand on any corner in State College and watch 1,000 young people walk by, and nobody is going to remember your face. Nobody is going to flag your behavior. Because everybody is in costume. Everybody is acting weird. You blend into the noise. Hold on to that. Because somebody, on this particular night, used that noise to commit a crime that has never been solved. Hyun Jong Song. Everybody called her Cindy, 21 years old, a senior at Penn State majoring in integrative arts. I want you to really understand who Cindy was, because this matters when we get to the theories. Cindy was an international student from South Korea. She had built an entire life for herself, thousands of miles from her family. She was active in the Korean Undergraduate Student Association. She volunteered with the Red Cross. She was part of a campus advertising club. She held down a steady job at a local Korean restaurant on top of all of it. She was just months away from graduation. Friends and family universally describe her as bright, vivacious, and rock-solid reliable. Her parents in South Korea spoke to her regularly. They knew about her grades, her plans, her routines. There was zero, and I mean zero, behavioral indication that this was a person who was going to suddenly walk away from her life. She had everything to lose and nothing pulling her toward an exit. She was, in every measurable way, the absolute opposite of a runaway. October 31st, 2001. Cindy puts on her costume. It's a Playboy bunny outfit. Distinctive. Ears, tail, false eyelashes. She heads out with two friends, Stacy Paik and Lisa Kim, to a club called Players Nightclub on West College Avenue. They party until around 2 a.m. Then they leave the club and head over to a mutual friend's apartment where they hang out, decompress, and play video games for a couple of hours. Just winding down. Just being college kids. Around 4 a.m., they decide to call it a night. Stacy drives Cindy back to her apartment complex on Blue Course Drive. Stacy pulls up to the building. Cindy gets out. Stacy waves. Cindy waves back and walks toward the entrance. Stacy drives away. Now, this is the moment where the timeline starts to get strange. Stacy didn't watch Cindy actually unlock her door. She watched her walk toward the building, and that was that. So technically, we don't have a witness for the moment Cindy got home. But here's the thing. Forensic evidence proves she made it inside. Her backpack was in the apartment. Her false eyelashes were on the bathroom counter, neatly removed. Cindy had begun her nightly routine. She had taken off the eye makeup. She had set down her bag. She was, by every indication, settling in. And then, sometime between that moment and a few hours later, she vanished. When friends got worried and entered the apartment days later, here's what they found. The backpack sitting there. Her cell phone inside the backpack. Her false eyelashes on the counter. No struggle, no blood, no broken furniture. But her purse, with her credit cards and her driver's license, gone. Her bunny ears and tail, gone. And the front door, locked from the outside. Let's tear apart the theories. First theory is she decided to walk away from her life. This is the easiest one to dismiss, but let me do it for you anyway. If you are starting a new life, what do you take with you? Money, ID, phone. Cindy left her phone behind. Friends have said over and over that this was a girl who never went anywhere without her cell phone. You don't run away from your entire life and leave behind your only means of communication. She had every reason to stay and zero reasons to leave. Months from graduation, family in South Korea who depended on her, 2 jobs, a whole social circle, a future, and, oh yeah, the small detail. Who walks away from their entire life at 4 a.m. dressed in a bunny costume? You don't disappear in costume. You don't start fresh in Playboy bunny ears. The image alone tells you this theory is dead on arrival. Another theory is somebody intercepted her right at the apartment. Now we have to look at the puzzle of what was inside that apartment. The eyelashes were off. The backpack was set down. Cindy had clearly been inside, comfortable, doing her usual routine. So either she finished her routine, decided to leave again, and got snatched on the way out, or somebody was already inside the apartment when she got home. or somebody got her to open the door after she'd settled in. Some friends theorized she might have gotten hungry and walked to a 24-hour convenience store nearby, that she locked her door behind her, walked out, and got grabbed by an opportunistic predator on the street. It's a plausible theory, but it requires Cindy to have left her cell phone behind, which was wildly out of character for her. The other possibility is darker. Somebody knew her. Somebody was either waiting for her or knocked on her door after she got home. She trusted them enough to open up, and once they were in, they took her purse, took her keys, took the costume pieces, and locked the door behind them on the way out to delay the discovery of the scene. But here's the logic gap that nobody has ever solved. There was no sign of a struggle. None. In a small college apartment, a 21-year-old woman fights back. Things break, lamps fall over, walls scuff, neighbors hear yelling. None of that happened. Either she was taken by surprise so completely that she didn't have time to react, or she walked out willingly with whoever it was, expecting to come right back. Theory 3. The Philadelphia sighting. In early November, just days after Cindy disappeared, a witness in Philadelphia's Chinatown reported a chilling scene. They saw a young Asian woman who matched Cindy's description being forced into a vehicle. The woman was reportedly screaming, crying, yelling for help. Philadelphia is roughly 200 miles from State College. Now, hold on a second. Let's look at that. If somebody snatched Cindy in State College at 4 a.m. and managed to drive her, against her will, all the way across Pennsylvania to a major urban center, that is a long, long drive. That is hours of risk, hours of gas station stops, hours of being seen on highways, and it ends with the suspect somehow being public enough that a stranger in Chinatown sees a woman screaming in a car. How does a kidnapping victim survive a 200-mile road trip without somebody, somewhere, calling the cops? How do you transport a screaming woman in a bunny costume across multiple counties without getting pulled over? That sighting was eventually labeled unreliable, but it was never fully ruled out, and it haunts the case to this day. Because if it was real, it suggests a much darker, organized possibility. Trafficking. Theory 4 is about Hugo Selensky. In 2003, 2 years after Cindy vanished, an informant named Paul Weekly came forward to police. Weekly was a co-conspirator of a notorious northeastern Pennsylvania criminal named Hugo Selensky. And Weekly dropped a bombshell. He claimed that Selensky had kidnapped and murdered Cindy Song. When police excavated Selensky's property in Luzerne County, they found human remains, multiple sets of human remains. The man had been a serial killer, hiding bodies in his own yard. But here's the haunting part. None of those remains belonged to Cindy Song. So either Weekly was lying, or Selensky did kill Cindy and disposed of her somewhere else, somewhere that has never been searched. Either possibility is its own nightmare. Selensky himself has never been formally charged in connection with Cindy's disappearance. The lead is, technically, still open, and it remains chillingly plausible without ever crossing into proof. So what happened to Cindy Song? The honest answer is that we don't know. We have never known. The case has been worked by the Ferguson Township Police Department for over 20 years. The FBI got involved. Massive campus searches were conducted. Cindy's photograph was posted in every major missing persons database. Her parents flew in from South Korea, desperate for answers, and eventually flew home with nothing but grief. Her cell phone has never been turned back on. Her bank accounts have never been touched. Her email has never been logged into. The girl who never went anywhere without her phone has been digitally silent since the morning of November 1st, 2001. And here is the haunting image that I want you to leave with. It's 4 a.m. The streets of State College are finally starting to quiet down. The Halloween chaos is finally winding to a close. A 21-year-old international student gets dropped off at her apartment building. She's tired. She's still wearing bunny ears. She walks up to her front door, and she unlocks it, and she goes inside. She drops her backpack. She walks to the bathroom. She takes off her false eyelashes and sets them gently on the counter, the way she's done 100 times before. And then, in the next minute or the next hour, in that small window of total normalcy, she steps out of reality. She doesn't take her phone, she doesn't take her bank cards, she just leaves. Or somebody takes her. Either way, the front door clicks locked behind her, and Cindy's song never comes back. Imagine you're a single mother. You work the infectious disease ward at a major hospital. You put yourself through nursing school by working weekends in a rehab center. You have a 12-year-old daughter who you'd quite literally die for. You barely go out. You barely drink. But on one rare Saturday night, you decide to let loose, just for a few hours. You end up at a mansion party in one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. And by 5 a.m., you, your phone, and your 2-ton Pontiac Grand Prix have completely vanished from the face of the earth. How does that happen? How does an entire car disappear in suburban Philadelphia in 2009? Let me walk you through it. It's August 22nd, 2009, sliding into the early morning hours of August 23rd. The location is Gladwin, Pennsylvania. If you're not from the East Coast, let me paint a picture for you. Gladwin is part of what locals call the Main Line. It's old money, multi-million-dollar estates, stone walls, long winding driveways tucked behind mature oak trees, quiet streets where the loudest sound at night is a sprinkler system kicking on at 4 in the morning. It's the kind of place where you don't worry about crime, because crime, frankly, can't afford the property taxes. But here's the thing about the Main Line. Once you leave the well-lit driveways of those mansions, the surrounding roads get really, really dark. We're talking pitch black. Narrow, winding 2-lane stretches that cut through wooded estates and snake their way down toward the Schuylkill River. Roads that funnel you, eventually, toward Interstate 76, which can carry you east into Philadelphia or west toward the suburbs. If you don't know where you're going, those roads will swallow you whole. And on this particular night, sitting on top of one of those winding hills, there's a party. A real party. A glamorous, high-end, after-hours gathering at the home of an NBA player. Inside the mansion, people are playing board games, drinking champagne, killing time. Outside, the night is warm and quiet, and absolutely unforgiving for anyone who takes a wrong turn. Tony Lee Sharpless, 29 years old, from Downingtown, Pennsylvania. I want you to understand who Tony was, because this matters when we start dissecting what happened. Tony wasn't a partier. She wasn't reckless. She was a single mom who put herself through the Brandywine School of Nursing by working weekends at a rehab center. She landed a demanding, high-stakes job in the infectious disease ward at Lancaster General Hospital. She had a 12-year-old daughter who was the absolute center of her universe. But Tony was also human, and she was carrying a couple of heavy weights that night. She'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which she managed with medication. That medication came with one really important warning label. It didn't mix with alcohol, not even a little. And just a few months earlier, in April of 2009, Tony had completed a stint in rehab following a 2008 DUI. So here's the picture. A serious, devoted mother who rarely went out, a medication regimen with strict rules, a history that meant she should have been extra careful. And then, one Saturday night, her friend Crystal calls her up and asks her to come dancing. Tony said yes. That single yes is where everything goes wrong. It's 9:30 p.m. on August 22nd. Tony climbs into her black 2002 Pontiac Grand Prix, license plate DND 7772. There's less than a quarter tank of gas in it. Remember that. It matters. She picks up Crystal. They head into Center City, Philadelphia. They go to a nightclub. They dance. They drink. And then, sometime late, the night takes a turn that thousands of nights take in cities across America. Somebody invites them to an after party, a real one, at an NBA player's mansion in Gladwin. By 3 a.m., Tony and Crystal are at the mansion. Inside, people are playing the board game Taboo. Champagne is flowing. The vibe is loose. At 2:57 a.m., Tony's 12-year-old daughter, who can't sleep, sends her mom a text. Tony texts back immediately, "Get to sleep, home soon." Read that again, home soon. Now, this is where the night starts to come apart. Tony has now been awake for somewhere around 36 hours. She's been drinking on medication that explicitly forbids it. Her bipolar disorder, normally well managed, starts to slip. Around 5 a.m. during the Taboo game, somebody says something. Tony interprets it as a slur. Things escalate. She dumps a bottle of champagne on the kitchen floor. She kicks something. The host asks her to leave. Crying, furious, and obviously impaired, Tony and Crystal walk out, get in the Pontiac, and start driving down the dark, winding driveway. They make it just a few blocks before they start arguing. Crystal tells her she's too drunk to drive. Tony doesn't want to hear it, so Tony stops the car, tells Crystal to get out. And in the middle of the night, in a wealthy suburb she doesn't know, she leaves her friend on the side of the road, throws the Pontiac into drive, and disappears into the dark. At 4 a.m., Tony's cell phone goes silent. It never connects to a tower again. That's it. That is the last confirmed moment of Tony Sharpless's existence on planet Earth. Here's where things get genuinely strange. The most logical theory, the one police initially leaned on hard, is that Tony took a wrong turn in the dark. She was exhausted. She was impaired. Her sense of direction was, by her own mother's admission, terrible. The nearest highway entrance, Hollow Road, only allowed eastbound entry onto Interstate 76. To get home, Tony needed to go west. East would take her toward Philadelphia and eventually toward Camden, New Jersey. Now, there are a lot of bridges and rivers between Gladwin and the highway. The Schuylkill River winds through that whole landscape. So the police theory was simple. She got lost, she got disoriented, she drove down a boat ramp in the dark, and her car ended up at the bottom of the river. Sounds reasonable, right? Except, hold on a second, let's look at that. Search teams scoured the Schuylkill River with advanced sonar multiple times. They sent dive teams down. They mapped the river bottom, and here's what they found. They found dozens of sunken cars, decades of forgotten vehicles, old wrecks, everything you'd expect at the bottom of an urban river. What they did not find? A black 2002 Pontiac Grand Prix. Not a fender, not a tire, not a flake of paint matching her vehicle. Nothing. And think about what a car going off the road actually looks like. A 2-ton vehicle traveling at any speed leaves marks. Skid marks on the pavement, broken branches, a torn-up guardrail, a dent in the soft shoulder, tire treads in the grass. Crashes are violent, messy events. Tony's crash left no scar on the landscape whatsoever. But here's where the story gets really weird. 2 weeks after Tony vanished, an automated license plate reader mounted in Camden, New Jersey, registered a definitive hit on her tag. DND7772. Not a partial match, not a similar plate, her plate, in Camden, across the Delaware River from Philadelphia, in a high-crime, dense urban area. If Tony's car is at the bottom of the Schuylkill River, somebody please explain to me how her license plate is being scanned by a parked car reader in another state 2 weeks later. The Camden police, for reasons that have never been adequately explained, did not notify the Lower Merion Police Department right away. By the time investigators got out to Camden to physically search for the car, it was gone, vanished again. So now we have a vehicle that, according to the river theory, is submerged in the Schuylkill. But somehow that same vehicle was sitting parked on a Camden street weeks later. It can't be both. It has to be one or the other. And then, just to make the whole thing even stranger, there's the letter. In 2012, 3 years after Tony disappeared, a private investigator named Eileen Law received an anonymous letter. The writer claimed he'd been paid $5,000 in cash to drive Tony's Pontiac up to a chop shop in the Boston area. He claimed Tony had been killed during a violent confrontation with a Camden police officer. Police dismissed it as a hoax. But here's the thing. The letter contained 2 pieces of information that had never, ever been released to the public. Tony's missing cell phone number and the final 5 digits of her vehicle's VIN number. Information that only somebody close to the case or close to the disposal of the car could possibly know. So how do you reconcile that? Some people, mostly online sleuths who don't know Tony, have suggested she just decided to start a new life, that a manic episode pushed her to walk away from everything. Let me tear that one apart for you. Tony Sharpless had a 12-year-old daughter waiting for her at home, a daughter she had texted "home soon" at 2:57 a.m. She didn't bring extra clothes. She didn't take any money beyond what was in her purse. She didn't bring her bipolar medication, which she physically needed to function. Her phone died at 4 a.m. and never came back online. Her bank account went silent. Her email went silent. A person starting over takes their stuff. They take their meds. They text their kid to say they love her. They don't text "home soon" and then evaporate. A devoted single mother does not abandon her child at 4 a.m. because she got kicked out of a board game. That theory is dead in the water before it even leaves the dock. So what really happened to Tony Sharpless? The truth is, nobody knows. Private investigators have spent years working the case. River searches have come up empty. The Camden license plate hit was real, but the trail went cold within days. The anonymous letter contained protected information, but its author has never been identified. Sonar has scanned every body of water within reasonable distance. Cadaver dogs have walked every accessible roadside. And still, nothing. A 2-ton black Pontiac Grand Prix simply does not exist in any of the places it should exist. A 29-year-old nurse with a daughter, a job, a phone, a credit history, and a future has not used a single one of those things in over 15 years. Tony Sharpless is what investigators call a true ghost case. She didn't leave the world cleanly. She didn't die in any place anyone has been able to find. She didn't run away in any way that makes logical sense. She just drove out of a long, dark mansion driveway in the wealthiest suburb in Pennsylvania, took a wrong turn somewhere in the night, and slipped through the cracks of reality. And here's the haunting image that will not leave you. It's around 5 a.m. The sky over Gladwin is just starting to think about turning gray. A young mother in a black Pontiac is alone on a winding road, disoriented, exhausted. No GPS, no crystal in the passenger seat anymore. Less than a quarter tank of gas in the tank. She makes a turn. The headlights cut through the dark, and then the woods close in behind her, and that's the last anyone ever sees. Picture this. It's the dead of winter in rural Pennsylvania. A massive blizzard is howling outside, dumping snow so thick you can't see 10 feet in front of you. The wind chill is brutal, the roads are buried, and somewhere in that white nothingness, a 29-year-old mother of 2 is supposedly walking down a country road at 1:15 in the morning. No coat thick enough for the storm, no purse, no car, no hearing aids. Because here's the part that makes this one different from every other missing persons case you've ever heard. Lona Rogers was completely deaf, and on the night she vanished, she left her ears on the kitchen counter. Let me tell you what really happened in Hayfield Township. It's January 6th, 1981. The location is a small duplex on Route 98 just outside of Meadville in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. If you've never been to this part of the state, let me set the stage for you. This isn't suburbia. This isn't a neighborhood with streetlights and sidewalks and 24-hour gas stations on the corner. This is rural, isolated, hard country. The kind of place where your nearest neighbor might share a wall with you, but the next house down the road is a quarter-mile away through tree lines and empty fields. And on this particular night, the sky opens up. A severe winter storm slams into northwestern Pennsylvania. We're talking blowing snow, near zero visibility, and temperatures plunging well below freezing. Roads become impassable. The historical weather data from nearby Erie shows light snow building all day on the 6th, then escalating into blowing snow conditions by the 7th. The kind of storm where state troopers tell you to stay off the roads. The kind of storm where if your car breaks down on a country highway, you're in real trouble. Inside the duplex on Route 98, 2 people are about to have the worst fight of their lives, and here's a detail that just makes the whole thing more haunting. Both of them are profoundly deaf. So while the wind is screaming outside the walls, the argument inside is silent. No raised voices, no shouting matches, just hands moving fast and hard. Visual fury. That's the atmosphere. Hold on to it, because it matters. Lona Ray Rogers. Friends and family called her Lonnie. She was 29 years old, a mother of 2 beautiful kids, ages 1 and 6. She'd been deaf since she was 18 months old, and she lived almost entirely in the world of sign language and visual communication. Now, I want you to understand who Lonnie was, because this matters when we start tearing apart the theories. She wasn't some drifter. She wasn't unstable. She wasn't the kind of woman who disappears for a weekend and turns up later. Lonnie worked as a maid at a local hotel. She was holding down a physical demanding job to provide for her 2 little kids. Her daughter, Allison, would later describe her as caring, loving, and endlessly empathetic. And here's the most important detail of all. On the morning of January 6th, the day she vanished, Lonnie called her father. She asked him for money. Why? Because she had decided finally to leave her husband, to take the kids and get out. She was planning her escape. She was looking forward, not backward. Then there's the husband, Clinton Bud Rogers, also deaf, also part of the local deaf community. Also conveniently, a man with a documented criminal record going back to the day after their wedding in 1972 when he got busted breaking into a woman's car. He'd done jail time for theft, he was controlling, he was abusive. And in December of 1980, he'd weaseled his way back into the duplex under the excuse of spending the holidays with the kids. After Christmas, he just refused to leave. So that's the dynamic. A woman who's actively planning to escape her abuser, an abuser who's parked himself in her home and won't go, a blizzard outside, 2 toddlers asleep upstairs. This is the scene. Lonnie finishes her shift at the hotel. She picks up the kids from the babysitter. She drives home through the gathering snow. That night, inside the duplex, she tells Bud she's leaving him. For good. What happens next is where the official story starts. According to Bud, they have an argument. He goes to bed at 12:45 a.m. He wakes up sometime in the early morning hours. He notices Lonnie isn't in bed. He assumes she's sleeping on the couch. When he finds the couch empty, that's when, by his own account, things get very, very weird. Now, stop right here, because I want you to think about what a normal person does in that situation. Your wife is missing from the house in the middle of a historic blizzard. What do? You call the police, right? You call her family. You step outside and shout her name. You drive around the block. You know what Bud did? At 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of a blinding snowstorm, he bundled his 1-year-old and his 6-year-old into a vehicle and drove them to the babysitter's house. His explanation: he needed to go look for her. Hold on a second, let's look at that again. It is 3 a.m. The roads are barely drivable. He's a husband whose wife is missing in sub-zero conditions, and his first move is to wake up 2 toddlers, drag them through a deadly blizzard, and drop them off so he can be alone in the house. Does that sound like a worried husband to you? Then morning comes. Daylight breaks over Hayfield Township, and Lonnie Rogers is gone. This is where the story stops being a missing persons case and starts becoming something much darker. When investigators and family eventually entered that duplex, here's what they found. Her hearing aids sitting on the counter, her glasses right there, her purse untouched, her wallet inside the purse, her car keys on the table, her car still in the driveway, her medication in the cabinet, her 2 children now at the babysitter's house, and the dead, freshly fallen snow outside the duplex. Pristine, undisturbed, no footprints leading away from the door. None. Now, this is where it gets strange. The official story, the one Pennsylvania State Police clung to for 44 years, is that Lonnie Rogers walked out of that house into the blizzard and just kept going. A voluntary missing adult. That was the classification. For 4 decades. Let's tear that theory apart piece by piece. Theory 1 is she walked out to cool off. Okay, it's 1:15 a.m. The temperature is well below freezing. The wind is howling. The snow is blowing sideways. She's not dressed for an Antarctic expedition. How far can a 29-year-old woman realistically walk in those conditions before her body starts shutting down? A quarter mile, half a mile, and if she froze to death just down the road, the question is obvious. Where is the body? Spring came. The snow melted. Search parties combed the woods, and nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a bone, nothing. People don't just evaporate in rural Pennsylvania. Theory 2 is she got picked up and she left voluntarily. Let's really sit with this one. Lonnie was profoundly deaf and nonverbal. She communicated through sign language. She relied on her hearing aids for any sense of awareness about the world around her. So you're telling me she walked into a blinding blizzard on a rural road without her hearing aids? without the one tool that would let her hear an approaching truck or a snowplow or a stranger calling out to her? That's not just unlikely. That's behaviorally impossible. A deaf woman walking down a country road at night without her hearing aids is, functionally, a woman walking blind into traffic. She can't hear cars. She can't hear danger. She can't communicate with anyone who pulls over. Would a mother who spent her entire life navigating a hearing world voluntarily strip herself of the one device that kept her safe? No, she wouldn't. Theory 3 is she ran away to start a new life. Think about what that actually requires. Money, ID, a vehicle, a way to communicate with the outside world. Lonnie left all of it. Her purse, her wallet, her keys, her car, the works. Hours earlier, she had literally called her father and asked for money to leave Bud. She was making a plan. A real, financial, methodical plan. People who plan don't suddenly walk into a blizzard with nothing. And then there are the kids. A 1-year-old and a 6-year-old. Lonnie was, by every account, a fiercely devoted mother, a protective mother, a mother whose entire purpose was building a safer life for those 2 children. Are we really expected to believe she abandoned them in the middle of the night in the exclusive care of the man she was actively trying to escape? It doesn't add up. It never added up. There's one more detail, and it's the one that changes everything. That duplex on Route 98, it shared a wall with the neighbors, and on the night of January 6th, those neighbors heard something. They heard the arguing. That part isn't surprising. Couples fight. But after the arguing, they heard something else, something they described as unusual, heavy, rhythmic, thumping sounds coming through the shared wall. Now, in the world of forensic analysis of domestic violence homicides, thumping against a shared wall has a very specific meaning. It's the sound of a struggle. It's the sound of something heavy being moved. And then, silence. For 44 years, that silence was the official answer. State police kept the case classified as a missing person. They refused to escalate it to homicide. They told the family there wasn't enough evidence. When Lonnie's daughter, Allison, filed a right-to-know request in 2021 to access her own mother's case file, the police denied it. Their reason? An ongoing criminal investigation. After 40 years of insisting it was just a missing persons case. You can't make this stuff up. For 4 decades, Lonene Rogers existed in bureaucratic limbo. A ghost in a filing cabinet, a name on a billboard. The system had decided she'd just walked into a blizzard and disappeared, and that was the end of that. But her daughter never stopped pushing. Allison Duiker wrote a memoir. She launched advocacy campaigns. She fought for legislation called Lonnie's Law that would force police to release cold case files to families after 20 years. She put her mother's face on billboards along US 19. And in November of 2025, the man who had walked free for 44 years finally broke. Clinton Bud Rogers confessed. He admitted he murdered his wife. The runaway theory? Dead. The blizzard walk? A lie? The voluntary missing adult? A profoundly devoted mother killed in her own home on the night she finally found the courage to leave. But here's the thing. Even with the confession, even with the truth finally on the record, Lonene Rogers' body has never been found. Somewhere in that rural Crawford County landscape, somewhere under decades of seasons and snow and silence, she's still out there. And the haunting image remains. Not the one Bud Rogers tried to sell us, of a young deaf mother stepping into a wall of white snow and disappearing into the storm. That image was always a fiction. The real image is quieter, sadder. A woman who packed her plans into a phone call to her father, a woman who picked up her kids from the babysitter and drove home through the gathering snow. A woman who walked into her own kitchen for the last time, set down her hearing aids, and never picked them up again. The blizzard didn't take Lonene Rogers. The man sleeping in the next room did. And it took 44 years for anyone in power to finally listen. It's Mother's Day, 1938. A family is packing up after a picnic in the Allegheny forest. The dad is loading the car. The mom is resting in the front seat. An 11-year-old girl is walking back to give her mother a bouquet of wildflowers. And just behind a big rock, maybe 60 feet from the parked car, her 4-year-old little sister is finishing up picking the rest of those flowers. 60 seconds pass, maybe 90. The 11-year-old turns around to walk back to her sister. The 4-year-old is gone. No scream, no rustle, no footprints leading off into the brush. A bright red 4-year-old girl in a forest of brown bark and green leaves has vanished without making a single sound. Within 24 hours, 3,000 searchers will be combing the woods. Bloodhounds will be brought in from New York. Coal miners and World War I veterans will sweep the underbrush in a coordinated grid. The Civilian Conservation Corps will join the hunt. 35 square miles of dense Pennsylvania wilderness will be covered foot by foot. They will find absolutely nothing. Let me tell you what really happened to Marjorie West. It's Sunday, May 8th, 1938. The location is Marshburg, Pennsylvania, deep in the heart of the Allegheny National Forest. To understand this case, you really have to understand this place. America is still grinding its way out of the Great Depression. The Wests are doing okay, but money is tight everywhere. Mother's Day is a real, treasured occasion. You don't go out for brunch. You don't buy expensive gifts. You drive your family out to the woods. You pack a basket, and you spend the day together. The Allegheny Forest, though, that's a different beast. This is not a manicured city park. The Allegheny is hundreds of thousands of acres of dense, unforgiving wilderness, steep ravines, thick underbrush you can't see 20 feet through, black bears, rattlesnakes, and underneath all of it, a hidden danger that's specific to this region. This part of Pennsylvania was the heart of America's first oil boom back in 1859. The whole forest is dotted with abandoned, exposed oil wells, deep, dark holes drilled straight down into the earth, mostly unmarked, mostly forgotten. So picture the contrast. On the surface, you have a wholesome 1930s Norman Rockwell scene, a family in their Sunday best, a wicker picnic basket, a father about to go trout fishing, a mother resting after lunch, 2 girls picking wildflowers behind a big rock. But just past the boulder, the forest closes in, dense, dark, riddled with hazards, the sort of place where a 4-year-old in patent leather shoes does not stand a chance. Hold on to that picture, because in just a few minutes, that picture is going to come apart. Marjorie West, 4 years old, the youngest of 3 children belonging to Shirley and Cecilia West of Bradford, Pennsylvania. I want you to really see her because she's almost cartoonishly identifiable. Curly red hair, freckles, a red Shirley Temple hat, patent leather shoes, the kind of little girl who, if she walked through a department store, would draw eyes. She wasn't quietly dressed, she wasn't camouflaged. She was a flash of red in a green and brown forest. Her older sister Dorothea was 11, her brother Alan was 7. The family was stable, loving, financially okay by Depression standards. Marjorie was, by every account, a typical 4-year-old. Could she wander away from her parents? Sure, any toddler can. But she wasn't a risk-taker, she wasn't a runner, and she certainly wasn't going to navigate her way through hundreds of yards of dense forest on her own steam. That morning, the family had gone to church in Bradford. After the service, they piled into the car for a 90-minute drive out to Marshburg. They were joined by family friends, the Ackerlins. The plan was simple: lunch in the woods. The men would do a little fishing, the kids would play. Mom would relax. It was supposed to be the most ordinary Mother's Day in the world. It's around 3 in the afternoon. Lunch is winding down. Cecilia, Marjorie's mom, decides to head back to the family car parked near the road. She's tired. She wants to rest. Shirley, the dad, and Lloyd Ackerland are getting ready to walk down to a nearby stream to do some trout fishing. Marjorie and Dorothea ask if they can go pick wildflowers. The flowers are right there, behind a big boulder, just a short walk from the picnic spot. Shirley gives them the okay. He even reminds them to watch for rattlesnakes near the rocks, because that's the kind of thing 1930s Pennsylvania dads have to say. The girls walk over to the boulder. They start picking flowers. Dorothea gathers a little bouquet. She decides to walk it over to her mother in the car. She leaves Marjorie behind the boulder, alone, for maybe 60 seconds, maybe 90. We don't know exactly. But the window is small, tiny. The kind of window every parent has experienced 1,000 times. Dorothea hands the flowers to her mother. They exchange a quick word. Dorothea turns around to walk back to her sister, and Marjorie isn't there. The flowers she was picking are scattered. The boulder is just a boulder. The forest is just a forest. But the 4-year-old in the bright red Shirley Temple hat? Gone. At first, nobody panics. She's a little kid. She's hiding. She's playing. Marjorie loved hide and seek. The family calls out for her. They check behind the rock. They check the nearby trees. They expect her to giggle and pop out at any second. She doesn't. Within 10 minutes, the picnic has turned into a frantic search. Within an hour, neighbors are coming. By that night, the call has gone out across the entire region. The next morning, 3,000 people are walking the woods in a coordinated grid. This is where the case stops being a missing child case and starts being something genuinely impossible. By Monday, 500 searchers are in the woods. By Tuesday, that number balloons to 3,000. Coal miners, civilian Conservation Corps workers, World War I veterans, local hunters, police. Every flashlight in the city of Bradford is, quote, pressed into service. Bloodhounds are brought in from New York State. Native American trackers are hired specifically because of an old belief that mother bears sometimes carry off small children. They drain muddy oil wells, lowering men down into them on ropes to check the bottoms. 35 square miles, saturated with searchers, day and night, and here's what they find. A piece of lace near the boulder. But the family confirms Marjorie wasn't wearing lace, a freshly dug hole in the dirt, but 2 local guys eventually admit they dug it themselves days earlier to hide casks of cherry wine. Welcome to Prohibition-era rural Pennsylvania. That's it. That is everything that the search produces. No red fabric on a branch, no tiny footprint in the mud, no dropped patent leather shoe, no tuft of curly red hair, no blood, no bones, no body, no grave. 3,000 people, hundreds of trained dogs, 35 square miles of forest, and not one single physical trace of the brightest, most identifiable little girl you can possibly imagine. That is not how nature works. That's not how forests work. Let's pull apart the theories. Theory 1. She just wandered off into the woods and got lost. This is the official conclusion. Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner P.W. Foote stood in front of reporters on May 13, 1938, and announced his belief that little Marjorie had wandered off playing hide and seek and succumbed to the elements. Hold on a second. Let's think about that. A 4-year-old child in a dress and patent leather shoes. How fast can she actually move through dense underbrush? How far can she realistically get in 60 seconds before her sister turns around? 100 feet maybe? 200 at the absolute outside? Now, 3,000 searchers, professional bloodhounds, and the entire weight of Pennsylvania law enforcement cover 35 square miles, and they don't find her. If she wandered off and died of exposure, where is the body? Where is the dress? Where is the hat? Forests don't make 4-year-olds disappear. Animals scatter remains, but they don't erase them. A scrap of red fabric should have caught on a branch somewhere. A shoe should have been left in mud somewhere. Bloodhounds should have followed her scent somewhere. Instead, the dogs hit a dead end. And that dead end is really important. The dogs followed her scent, briefly, and then it stopped. At a nearby dirt road. A scent doesn't just stop in the middle of a forest. A scent stops at a road because the person stopped walking. They got into a vehicle. Theory 2, a bear or some other animal got her. The forest had bears, it had rattlesnakes, it had hazards. Maybe she fell into one of those abandoned oil wells. But here's the thing. If a wild animal attacks a 4-year-old child, there is going to be evidence. There's going to be blood. There's going to be a torn dress. A struggle leaves a mark. A scream gets heard. Marjorie's family was right there. They didn't hear a single thing. No cry, no yelp, no rustle of leaves, and the oil wells were checked. All of them. Animals don't erase children. The forest didn't take her. Theory 3, an illegal adoption ring took her. Now this is the theory that the family always believed. And honestly, in the context of 1938, it's not as crazy as it sounds. The decade leading up to Marjorie's disappearance had been the era of the infamous Georgia Tan adoption ring, where children were literally being stolen and sold to wealthy families across America. The Lindbergh kidnapping was still fresh in the national consciousness. Snatching a kid for profit was, terribly, a known business model. Witnesses on the day of the disappearance reported seeing 3 different cars passing through the area around 3 p.m. The dogs lost the scent at the road. But here's the logical wrinkle. How does a stranger sneak up on a family picnic, grab a 4-year-old, and drive away without a single member of the family hearing a thing? The answer, sadly, isn't that hard. The boulder blocked the line of sight. The dad's back was turned. The mom was sleeping in the car. Dorothea was walking away. The window was tiny, but it was real. And 4-year-olds, when grabbed by a stranger and clamped over the mouth, don't make a lot of noise. And then, decades later, comes the strangest twist of all. A local publisher named Harold Thomas Beck used age progression technology to match Marjorie's face to a North Carolina woman named Sylvia Waldrop London. After initially denying everything, Sylvia eventually told Beck that her own mother had confessed to her on her deathbed that her father had stolen her from a park as a child. Sylvia even remembered the names Dorothea and Alan from her early childhood. She died in 2009. The DNA test that could have closed the case forever was never performed. So what happened to Marjorie West? We will probably never know for certain. The case is now well over 80 years old. Everyone who was at that picnic is dead. The witnesses are dead. The searchers are dead. Sylvia London, the woman who might have been Marjorie all along, is dead. But the haunting core of this story has nothing to do with the theories. It has to do with a single, terrifying number. 60 seconds, maybe 90. That's the gap. That's the entire mystery. A father turns his back to load the car. A mother dozes in the front seat. An 11-year-old walks a bouquet of flowers 50 feet to her mom. And in that one tiny window, on the most peaceful day of the year, in the middle of a family Mother's Day picnic, a 4-year-old girl in a bright red Shirley Temple hat is swallowed by the earth. 3,000 searchers, 35 square miles, 80-some years of searching, nothing. Marjorie West never went home. And somewhere, in a forest she was never found in, or in a life she lived as somebody else, the answer to what happened in that 60-second window is still buried. It's 1:45 a.m. on a brutally cold December night in Pittsburgh. A surveillance camera mounted outside a row of Southside apartments catches a young man pacing on the sidewalk. He's holding a towel against his hand. His shirt is dark with what looks like blood. He's not wearing a coat. The temperature is well below freezing. He looks disoriented, lost. And then, after a few seconds of pacing, he walks out of frame and steps into the dark. That young man was 22-year-old Paul Kochu, an ICU nurse, a guy who had spent the last several years training for the exact moment he was now living, the moment when somebody is bleeding and disoriented and needs medical care. He had a phone, he had a wallet, he had a warm apartment behind him, he had roommates, he had every resource a human being could possibly need. He left all of it. 3 months later, his body would surface in the Ohio River, 50 miles south, in a different state. The coroner could not determine how he died. To this day, nobody can. Let me walk you through what we know. It's December 15th, 2014, sliding into the early morning of December 16th. The location is the south side of Pittsburgh. If you've never been to the south side, here's the picture. It's gritty, it's loud, it's one of the busiest nightlife strips in western Pennsylvania. Carson Street is wall-to-wall bars, restaurants, late-night pizza spots, and college kids. On any given weekend night, the sidewalks are packed. There are surveillance cameras everywhere, mounted on bars, mounted on businesses, mounted on apartment buildings. There are bouncers on every corner. There are cops cruising the strip looking for trouble. In other words, this is not a place where people just disappear. But here's the contrast that makes Pittsburgh feel sinister at night. A few blocks away from all that warmth and noise sits the Monongahela River, cold, dark, lined with industrial banks and abandoned lots. In December, that water is icy. Freezing wind cuts off the surface. The riverbanks are desolate, often unlit, and stretch for miles. Carson Street might be one of the busiest places in Pittsburgh on a Monday night. But the river? The river is the closest thing this city has to avoid. So picture it. A bustling, camera-saturated, witness-rich entertainment district on one side, and just a few blocks away, a freezing, lethal black river on the other. That contrast is the whole story. Paul Kochu, 22 years old, a recent graduate of Duquesne University's nursing program, and not just any nursing program. Paul had earned his way into one of the toughest jobs in healthcare. He was working as a brand new ICU nurse at Allegheny General Hospital. I want you to understand what that means. ICU nursing is the deep end of the medical pool. You are dealing with the sickest people in the building. You are managing ventilators. You are running emergency drugs. You are the person standing between a patient and the morgue. To do that job at 22, you have to be calm under pressure, methodical, and incredibly responsible. That was Paul. He was the responsible one. He was the guy his family bragged about. He was the kid who had figured it out early, gotten the degree, gotten the job, and was now saving lives for a living. He had a great relationship with his mom. He was not, by any measurable standard, a guy who took dumb risks or made impulsive decisions, which makes what happened next so impossible to make sense of. It's a Monday night, December 15th. There's a Monday night football game on. Paul and his roommates head out to a bar called Smokin' Joe's on the south side. They're drinking. They're watching the game. It's a normal Monday for normal guys in their 20s. But sometime during the night, something shifts. Paul has some kind of minor altercation, the details of which have always been hazy. He decides to leave the bar early. Alone, which, by his roommates' accounts, was a little out of character. Paul doesn't usually peace out before everyone else. He heads back to the apartment. And here's where the story gets really strange. Sometime between leaving the bar and his roommates getting home, Paul cuts his hand on a glass. It's not a life-threatening cut, but it's bleeding enough to be a problem. And here's the detail that should stop you in your tracks. Paul, the ICU nurse, the guy who literally handles medical emergencies for a living, calls his roommates. He asks them to come home and help him stop the bleeding. Hold on a second. Let's look at that. This is a man who, on any random Tuesday, at work, deals with arterial bleeds, with patients hemorrhaging, with crisis-level wounds. Stopping a hand laceration is for him the most basic skill in the toolbox. You apply pressure, you elevate, you bandage. He could do this in his sleep. Why is he calling his roommates for help with something he is more qualified to handle than they are? Either he was so drunk he couldn't think straight, or something else was going on inside that apartment that we don't fully understand. Because that phone call doesn't fit the man. The roommates come home. According to their accounts, when they got there, things escalated. There was a physical altercation of some kind. Paul fell or was pushed into a wall. After this confrontation, the roommates left the apartment, supposedly to go grab food. When they came back, Paul was gone. At 1:45 a.m., a surveillance camera mounted in the area captured Paul outside the apartment. And what that camera shows is genuinely chilling. Paul is pacing. He's holding a towel against his hand. He looks disoriented. He's having trouble walking, almost stumbling. His mother, who has watched that footage many times, has been adamant that what the camera shows isn't a drunk guy. It's a guy who has been physically traumatized. He's not wearing a coat. The temperature is below freezing. Pittsburgh wind in December cuts straight through fabric, and Paul has nothing on but a thin shirt. After a few seconds, he walks out of frame. And nobody ever sees him alive again. Inside the apartment, his roommates eventually report him missing. When investigators come through, here's what they find. Paul's wallet sitting there, his cell phone sitting there, his keys sitting there, his winter coat hanging up. He left every single thing he would have needed to survive a freezing Pittsburgh night, and he walked into the dark. Let's pull the theories apart. Theory 1 is he was just drunk and wandered into the river. This is the easy answer. The official answer, more or less. Paul was intoxicated, he was disoriented, he wandered down to the riverbank, he slipped, he fell in, he drowned. Hold on a second, let's look at that. The south side, at 1:45 a.m. on a Monday night is still active. There are bouncers outside bars, there are cabs, there are pedestrians, there are dozens of surveillance cameras on dozens of businesses. And we're talking about a young man who was visibly bleeding, visibly disoriented, and visibly without a coat in sub-zero wind chill. How does a guy like that walk multiple blocks toward the river without being seen by a single bouncer, without being captured on a single additional camera, without a single passing driver going, "Hey, that guy looks like he needs help"? In Pittsburgh, in December on Carson Street, you do not slip through that kind of environment unnoticed. And here's the kicker that nobody can explain. The surveillance footage that does exist, it shows Paul walking away from the river, not toward it. So if he ended up in the water, somebody or something put him on a different path than where he was last seen heading. Theory 2 is, he was an ICU nurse. Of course, he handled it himself. This one falls apart even faster. Paul was professionally trained in medical care. He knew, better than almost anyone in that neighborhood, what to do for a hand laceration. He knew that the absolute worst thing you can do for any kind of injury is to walk away from a warm apartment into freezing weather without a coat, without your phone, without a way to call 911, without your wallet, without ID. If he needed real medical attention, the hospital was a phone call and a cab ride away. He worked at one. He could have called a coworker. He could have woken up a neighbor. A trained nurse who is hurt does not walk into the dark without a single tool. That is not a medical decision. That is something else. That is somebody who is either not in their right mind, not in control of their body, or not making the choice voluntarily. Theory 3 is, the roommates know more than they're saying. This is where it gets really uncomfortable. According to reports, when investigators looked into the timeline, the roommates' accounts of that night had inconsistencies. Polygraph tests were administered. The results, depending on the source, were mixed. One reportedly passed, another was inconclusive. If there was a physical altercation in the apartment that was more serious than anyone has admitted, that completely reframes everything we see in the surveillance footage. A guy stumbling, holding a towel to his head and his hand, not making clear decisions. That's not a drunk man. That could be a concussion. That could be somebody fleeing the apartment, not exiting it casually. But there has never been enough evidence to charge anyone. The roommates have always denied wrongdoing. The case sits in that horrible gray area of suspicion without proof. Theory 4 is about the smiley face killer. Now I have to mention this one because the family does, and because the pattern is genuinely unsettling. Across the Midwest and the Rust Belt, over the past 2 decades, there's been a string of cases involving young, capable men who go missing after nights out and turn up later in regional waterways. Joey LaBute in Columbus, Ohio, multiple cases in Pittsburgh, cases in La Crosse, Wisconsin, cases in Iowa. Some investigators, mostly retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, have argued that this isn't a coincidence. They've theorized that these men are being targeted, drugged, killed, and dumped into rivers to look like accidental drownings. They call it the smiley face killer theory because, allegedly, smiley face graffiti has been found near several of the recovery sites. Most law enforcement agencies dismiss the theory. They say these are tragic but unconnected accidents involving young men, alcohol, and water. But the pattern, statistically, is at least worth raising an eyebrow at. If something like that happened to Paul, somebody intercepted a bleeding, disoriented young man on a Pittsburgh sidewalk, drugged him further or rendered him unconscious, and dumped him into the river. In a busy neighborhood. Without a struggle. Without a single witness. Possible, I guess, but it requires a level of skill and audacity that defies belief. 3 months after Paul stepped off camera, on March 19, 2015, fishermen pulled his body from the Ohio River near Wheeling, West Virginia, 85 river miles downstream from Pittsburgh. Think about that. 85 miles, through multiple locks, multiple dams, multiple shallows where a body should have snagged. Paul's body somehow made that journey. He was found completely nude. He had 3 fractured ribs. He had a 1-inch deep wound on his scalp. His blood alcohol level, somehow detectable months after the fact, came back at 0.15. The West Virginia medical examiner ruled the death an undetermined freshwater drowning. The Pittsburgh police eventually used that classification to quietly close the case. Officially, it's not a homicide. Officially, it was a tragic accident. Officially, a 22-year-old ICU nurse just walked into the dark and fell into the river. His mother has never accepted that. And honestly, after looking at the facts, neither should you. Here's the haunting image that lingers. It's 1:45 a.m. on a freezing Pittsburgh sidewalk. A young man is pacing in front of his apartment, holding a towel to his hand. He's bleeding. He's confused. His coat is right inside the door behind him. His phone is on the counter. His keys are on the counter. His wallet is on the counter. The whole life he built, the nursing degree, the ICU job, the proud family, the future, all of it is sitting 20 feet away on the other side of a wall. And then he turns. He walks out of the camera's frame. And he doesn't take any of it with him. 85 miles of black water later, the river gives him back. But it doesn't give back the answer to what happened in that doorway. It never does. It's a Friday morning in February 2002. A 44-year-old mom in small-town Pennsylvania drops her 2 kids off at school. She drives home. She takes a package of meat out of the freezer and sets it on the kitchen counter to defrost for that night's dinner. She tosses a load of laundry in the washing machine. Then she gets in her car, drives to a park in the next county over, sits down on a bench, and starts crying. She does not pick her kids up from school that afternoon. Her car is found parked, her purse, her ID, her money, all left behind. The dinner she set out to thaw is still sitting on the counter when police arrive at the house that night. The most obvious conclusion is that she was murdered. The most obvious suspect is her husband. For the next decade, that's exactly the conclusion everyone draws. Police pin him down, friends turn on him. Her own kids grow up grieving a mother they believe is dead. And then, 11 years later, a sun-weathered, leather-skinned woman walks into a sheriff's office in Key Largo, Florida, and casually informs the deputies that she's a missing person from Pennsylvania. This is the strangest, most psychologically disturbing missing persons case I think I've ever heard. Because the monster in this story isn't an abductor. The monster is the moment when an ordinary person decides to delete themselves from their own life. Let me walk you through it. It's February 2002. The location is Lidditz, Pennsylvania. If you've never been to Lidditz, picture the most wholesome small town you can imagine and then dial it up another notch. Lidditz is in Lancaster County, the heart of Pennsylvania Dutch country. It's a place of brick sidewalks, historic homes, and picture-perfect main streets. Lidditz has been voted, more than once, the coolest small town in America. It's the kind of place where violent crime is genuinely rare, where neighbors know each other, where you walk to the bakery on a Saturday morning, where children ride bikes to school without anybody worrying about it. This is not a place where mothers disappear. Inside the Heist household, things look entirely normal from the outside. Brenda, her husband Lee, 2 kids, an 8-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, a typical American family in a typical American town. But underneath the surface of that quiet little life, the foundations were cracking. Brenda and Lee were going through a divorce. It was, by all accounts, amicable. Not nasty, not violent. But divorce, even an amicable one, is a financial earthquake. And Brenda, a stay-at-home mom transitioning into single motherhood, was getting hit hard. Just days before the morning we're about to talk about, Brenda had received a piece of devastating news. She had applied for state housing assistance to help her get on her feet, and she had been denied. That denial is the spark that lights this entire fire. Without that assistance, she was looking at a financial future that felt completely impossible. Hold on to that, because that small bureaucratic letter is going to detonate her entire life. Brenda Heist, 44 years old, mother of 2. By every measurable metric, she was a textbook suburban mom. She was the woman who packed lunches and went to parent-teacher conferences. She was, by family accounts, deeply devoted to her kids. I want you to really sit with that, because this matters when we get to the theories. Brenda was not an unstable woman. She wasn't a drifter. She wasn't somebody with a hidden double life. She was a soccer mom in Lancaster County who got blindsided by a divorce and a denied housing application. She also did not have, as far as anyone knew, any of the obvious risk factors that show up in the cases of people who disappear voluntarily. No drug history, no major mental health crisis on record, no criminal background, no prior runaway behavior. She was just a regular person. A regular, exhausted, frightened, financially cornered woman. It's a Friday. Brenda gets the kids up. She drives them to their respective schools. She kisses them goodbye. She comes home. And here's where her behavior gets so haunting in retrospect, because everything she does in those next 2 hours is the behavior of someone who fully intends to be home that evening. She tosses a load of laundry into the washing machine. She pulls a package of meat out of the freezer and sets it on the counter to thaw. That is a deeply mundane, deeply forward-looking action. You do not put dinner out to defrost in the morning unless you fully expect to be cooking it that night. Then, she gets in her car, and she drives to a park in a neighboring county. She sits on a park bench, and she starts crying. She is, in that moment, completely overwhelmed. The denied housing assistance, the looming divorce, the financial cliff, the single motherhood. Everything is collapsing in her head at once. And while she is sitting on that bench, weeping, 3 strangers approach her. 2 homeless women, 1 homeless man, hitchhikers. They sit down, they talk to her, and in the middle of her breakdown, they make her an offer that on any other day in her life she would have laughed at. They tell her they're hitchhiking down to Florida. They invite her to come along, and Brenda, sitting there with mascara running down her face, says yes. She doesn't go home. She doesn't pack a bag. She doesn't take her purse. She doesn't take her wallet. She doesn't take her credit cards. She doesn't write a note for her kids. She doesn't call anyone. She doesn't return for the laundry. She doesn't put the meat back in the freezer. She just gets up off that bench, walks away from her abandoned car, and starts hitchhiking south with 3 homeless strangers. Brenda doesn't pick the kids up from school that afternoon. The police are called, the car is found, the house is searched, and from the moment investigators see that meat sitting on the counter and that half-finished laundry, they are absolutely certain of one thing: this is foul play. You don't walk away from your life with the dinner thawing. You don't leave half-folded laundry. You don't abandon your purse and your ID and every dollar in your bank account. The scene perfectly mimicked a homicide. And in homicide cases involving a missing wife, the spouse is always the first suspect. So the cops zero in on Lee Heist. For years, Lee Heist's life was hell. He was investigated, he was interrogated, he was forced to take a polygraph. His friends and neighbors looked at him sideways. The kids grew up under the cloud of a father who, in the eyes of most of the community, had probably murdered their mother and gotten away with it. Lee was eventually cleared. But cleared doesn't undo a decade of suspicion. Cleared doesn't repair a destroyed reputation. Cleared doesn't give you back the years you spent grieving a missing wife while being treated like a killer. The years go by. There are no leads, no body, no witnesses, no tips. Brenda's photograph hangs on the wall in the Lidditz police headquarters, just another fading face in a stack of cold cases. And in 2010, 8 years after that morning, Lee finally goes to a court and asks for Brenda to be declared legally dead. The kids, by then teenagers, have grown up without their mother. That should be the end of the story. It isn't. In April of 2013, 11 years after Brenda walked away from that park bench, a weathered, sun-bleached woman walks into a Monroe County Sheriff's office in Key Largo, Florida. She'd been picked up on outstanding warrants for using a false identity, Kelsey Smith, during a traffic stop. And while she was sitting in custody dealing with that, she casually mentioned to the deputies that she was, oh, by the way, a missing person from Pennsylvania. It was Brenda. She was alive. She had been alive the entire time. Now, this is where it gets truly strange, because the explanation for those 11 years is in some ways more bizarre than any kidnapping or murder theory could ever be. Let's look at the logic gaps. The "I just said yes to strangers" gap. Brenda's own explanation is that she had a complete psychological break on that bench, and when those 3 hitchhikers offered her a way out, she took it on a whim. But hold on a second, who actually does that? In the real world, who walks away from their car, their kids, their bank account, their entire identity on a whim with 3 homeless people they met 5 minutes earlier? It is not a normal human decision. It is the kind of decision people make in movies, the kind of decision that, in real life, virtually never happens. And yet, that's apparently exactly what happened. The 11-year ghost gap. This is the part that genuinely makes my brain hurt. How do you live in modern America for over a decade without leaving a single digital fingerprint? Brenda spent those 11 years sleeping under bridges in Florida. She lived in tent cities. She lived in a camper in Key West for a while. She panhandled, she did day labor, she got paid when she got paid in cash. She used a fake name. She survived multiple hurricanes. She survived the streets. She got pulled over at least once during all of that, and she gave a fake ID, and they let her go. In an era of facial recognition, of social security numbers, of credit checks, of national missing persons databases, a 44-year-old suburban mom from Pennsylvania completely vanished into the homeless underclass of America and stayed there for 11 years. She never used her real name. She never opened a bank account. She never got medical care that would have required her ID. She never got a real job. She never broke down in a moment of weakness and called her children. 11 years. 11 years without a single phone call to her own kids. That isn't a runaway. That is a woman who, on some deep psychological level, executed the most thorough disappearance you can possibly execute without any of the usual help that comes from money or planning. The psychological horror gap. And then there's the part that's almost too dark to look at directly. While Brenda was sleeping under a bridge in Key West, her ex-husband Lee was a murder suspect. Her son and daughter were growing up motherless. Her parents were going to their graves believing their daughter had been killed. Her photograph hung on a precinct wall. She knew. She had to know. Even living rough, you see the news. You see missing posters. You hear about cold cases. And for 11 years, she made the active choice every single day to not pick up a phone. That isn't just running away. That is something so much darker. That is somebody choosing over and over and over again to remain dead to her own children. When Brenda walked into that Florida sheriff's office in 2013, the case was technically solved. The mystery of what happened to Brenda Heist had an answer. She was alive. But the answer didn't bring closure. It didn't bring a happy ending. Her kids, now adults, were faced with the reality that their mother had been alive the whole time and had simply chosen not to come back. Lee, the husband who had spent a decade under suspicion, didn't get those years back. The legal declaration of death was unwound, but the trauma was not. And here's the haunting truth at the center of this case. When we tell missing person stories, we usually want a villain, a kidnapper, a killer, a monster in the woods or in the next room. We want somebody to blame. We want a face for the evil that took our person away from us. But in the Brenda Heist case, there is no monster. There is no villain. There is no abductor. There is just a woman in her 40s sitting on a park bench, crying about a denied housing application and making a choice. A choice that destroyed her family and ruined her husband's life and left her own children without a mother. And here is the haunting image that I want you to leave with. It's not a forest. It's not a black river. It's not a locked apartment. It's a kitchen counter in Leaditz, Pennsylvania. There's a load of laundry in the washer. There's a package of meat sitting out, slowly thawing in the afternoon sun coming through the window. The clock on the wall is ticking past 3 o'clock. School is letting out. 2 kids are walking out the front doors looking for their mom's car in the pickup line. And 800 miles south, on an interstate on-ramp, a 44-year-old woman with mascara streaks on her cheeks is climbing into the back of a stranger's car and disappearing for the next decade. The scariest monster in this story is the one that lives inside us, the one that whispers in our worst moments that we could just walk away. Brenda Heist listened.